Welcome, everybody, to the Raad Life, the only talk radio show that takes you along with host and age explorer Raad on his continuing journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older. The Raad Life is brought to you this week by Your Home for a Lifetime, a company dedicated to empowering you to stay safely, independently, and comfortably in your own home. And now here is your host, Raad Gantos.
Raad Gantos isn't paying attention here. He's playing around here.
Okay, so we're on the air live.
Yes, we are.
And we're on Facebook Live
Yes,
on my page. If you have any questions for me or Tara as we talk to you guys for the next hour or so, please type it in if you're watching us on Facebook, and we'll try to incorporate it into the conversation, or we'll call you out if it's a stupid question. There's no such thing, by the way. Just ask us whatever you want.
You know, I have to say, for those who are just listening, you really need to tune in, because there are two sharply dressed dudes on the channel here today. Not if I brought in my friends, we'd look like a bunch of ex-Grateful Dead members here or something.
You know, what can I tell you? When you're right, you're right. I agree with you, Paul. But it really is. It's really is interesting. We could talk about the show being a life's journey, and
well, tell me who he is first. Nobody knows but you right now who your guest is.
We talk about it being a life's journey, and one of the things that I really treasure, honestly, is to be able to say that I have some friends that I have known for a long time, since the 70s, as Tarek was saying, right? And I've known this gentleman since high school, 3 continents over. We end up being about 15 minutes away from each other in Orange County.
True.
Right? A whole life worth of different adventures, and got life taking us in different locations and different places. And we end up here sitting across the table from one another on OC Talk Radio, talking about life's journey and talking about some of the exciting stuff that he's doing now, and how we found ourselves here. And everybody has a story like that, right? So Paul has many stories like that.
I'll tell you one thing, though, just to start off on a serious note. I don't see many people in California have that story. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm in my 60s, as your friend may not know, but your audience does every time.
And
I have I have a group of friends that I've known since junior high, basically, or high school, and they're scattered around the country. We connect through Facebook, and we periodically, once every 10 years, we see each other something, but there's a connection there. When I came to California, because everybody came from somewhere else and was uprooted, I don't see a lot of that. I don't see a lot of people who've grown up knowing people from Irvine High School, and they've known each other for 10 years, and they've just kind of hung out. I don't know if that's different here or if it's different there, but I don't see a lot of it.
Well, our situation is pretty unique. I mean, we grew up in a foreign country. None of us are natives of Kuwait, and that's where we grew up. We're mainly expatriates, and right after graduation...
Yeah, we weren't even immigrants. We were expats, basically, there because our parents were working there.
Right, and we went to a British school. We didn't go to a local school. It was British, and so we had friends from all over the world. And right after graduation, we were dispersed all over the world, literally.
Right.
You went back to wherever your parents had come from here.
Well,
no, we didn't even have that. We didn't have that ability, actually. And it's interesting because that ties into what we're going to talk about later.
Right.
But no, our parents were, at least one of our parents, my father, basically, is Palestinian. We're refugees.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to watch what's going on here today. What we have experienced throughout our lives as being refugees, not really with a homeland.
Right.
And basically having to depend on, those old cliches of, education, advancing yourself, having a motivation and drive to seek out goals, whatever they may be.
So let's just set the stage. So your father, Rod, was a civil engineer?
My father is a civil engineer, but my father...
And so he took jobs working on big construction projects like in Kuwait or
pretty
Iraq
much.
or whatever.
We start out. I mean, he graduated from American University of Beirut, a Jesuit university, very well respected. We were fortunate enough that he was able to go there. Ironically, my father wanted to be a doctor, but because they are, a family of 6 refugees left in '48 from Palestine, we were in Haifa, and literally I remember, stories about my grandmother, and because my grandfather left before, trying to find where they would go. Iraq was one. Kuwait was actually an option, but there was no academic system in Kuwait, so they ended up in Iraq because there was a schooling system in Iraq, and he had 6 children, of which one is my father. 5 were born in Palestine. The 6th, my Aunt Hanan, was born actually in Iraq. But my grandmother and the kids were crossing the border under sniper fire
So
in 1948. So when we say refugees crossing a border for safety and for to protect, basically not because they wanted to, but because their life was basically at risk. And these are Christian, Greek Orthodox, Arab, Palestinians, multi-generation in that land. Basically, we ended up being very displaced in 1948, and like us, many others of different religions and different towns.
I never knew
Tara's
until
background's
this
the same.
moment. The 2 years ago, I knew your father was Greek Orthodox,
Yep.
and your mother is
Catholic, half Lebanese, half Iraqi.
okay. And I did not know until now that your father's place of birth was Palestine.
Haifa, yeah.
So when they left, let me just ask a few questions. I'm fascinated by this. I didn't know this. When they left, why did they leave? Because of the chaos. This is the first Arab-Israeli war, when Israel was formed as a state, and a war erupted. No, you're not going to make a Jewish state out of this. What has been for the last 1,000 years or something, not a Jewish homeland anymore. It was thousands of years ago.
It wasn't what most people reflect to on as being sort of the Arab-Israeli War, which is 1967.
Right.
This is 1948. This is the displacement of a lot of Palestinians out of multiple parts of what is now Israel.
Because they were forming a Jewish state.
Yes.
And so my question is, did they leave because they didn't want to be part of the Jewish state? Did they leave because they were forced out of the Jewish state? Did they leave because it was just chaos and we got to save ourselves and get out of here? It's war.
We left because your life was at risk. If you were an Arab at that time, a Palestinian at that time, you were basically at risk. People forget that there was sort of, if you will, a war of independence, or there were people that were on the Israeli side that were militia, that were basically engaged in combat, in conflict, and people were either defending their homes, or maybe there was a faction of Palestinians that were saying, no, we won't take that. But the people were caught in the crossfire in the formation of the state of Israel.
Menachem Begin used to run Irgun, which was the sort of a terrorist wing of...
In fact, there were posters by the British Mandate that actually showed a bunch of people that then went on to become leaders of the state of Israel that were at that time wanted for terrorism, basically.
Well, exactly. Actually,
you got to get closer.
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, you can actually pick it up.
And I'm not picking on this because of any kind of resentment, but you asked the question to set the stage. That in 1948 were the condition upon which we, as a family from Haifa, a Christian family in Haifa, that were there for multiple years, involved in multiple generations, involved with the church, Greek Orthodox. You can't paint it all as being a sort of a Muslim, Islamic Jewish kind of,
right.
that crusade kind of element. No, these were Christian Arabs.
Not all Arabs are Muslims, right?
And my grandmother escaped to Lebanon across the border, literally with a bag of whatever they could carry, under sniper fire. That is part of my history. Tarek has probably a similar story.
And one other thing, I don't want to start a very, I don't want people to be angry with me, but I remember studying in college in the 70s, the Arab-Israeli conflict, as it was then called, and I had a professor who was Jewish who said, as much as I support the state of Israel, the Jews needed to create a homeland so never again will they be wiped out as they were in World War II. They can gather someplace. The diaspora can come back together again. But the problem is when they came back together in what was traditionally their homeland thousands of years ago, other people live there now.
And ironically,
it was an empty land.
And we don't want to go back into where do you start the snapshot of history.
Right.
But the irony of all ironies is that reconciliation, if you will, caused exactly the same displacement.
Yes. That's what he said. One of the things that Jewish state will have to come to deal with
to another group of people,
that they discriminate. A group that had been historically one of the most discriminated against, kicked all around Europe, horrible things, pogroms, leading up to annihilation under Hitler. When they finally reconstituted as a group and came together, they did discriminate against those who had long since taken over the land they left.
So that's my background. But I mean, Tarek, what was your? How did you?
What did your father do, and why were you
family leave?
Well, it's a very similar situation. Basically, and after the war, my father's father, basically was involved in the war and was killed actually. And my father at that time was.
This is your grandfather.
This is my grandfather.
Yeah.
And my father was 12.
And you're similarly Palestinian?
Yes.
So your dad was fighting against the incorporation of the state.
And where are you guys from in Palestine?
We are originally from a place called Hebron.
Or Hebron.
And but we all grew up in, or my family grew up in Jerusalem. I grew up in Kuwait, as you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were basically onlookers on the whole situation. We weren't really involved.
Yeah, we
in
both
the
were
struggle.
born
Yeah,
outside.
we were born in actual
Right.
very, very comfortable situation. So we really didn't. We weren't the refugees our parents were.
And what did your dad do that took him to Kuwait?
My father, as I
Kuwait.
said, when his father passed away, he was killed. He was only 13, and he was living in Jerusalem at that time. And then he migrated to Kuwait by choice from Jerusalem. And he started. Actually, his father was killed at 13, but he migrated at 17, and moved to Kuwait.
So why Kuwait?
Because Kuwait was flourishing at that time, and he's a businessman, and he did very well in Kuwait for himself.
And what did he do? What?
He had multiple companies, mainly in consumer electronics and air conditioning and refrigerating and department stores, which I eventually ran in '85 when I went back to Kuwait. But my point is that we are different in the sense that we didn't really struggle.
I'm sorry to laugh. Department store, it just sounds so Western. Just I ran a department store in Kuwait.
Remember,
I know Kuwait is a very wealthy country, but somehow we still picture it as people in long robes
you're referring to Kuwait today.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not referring to Kuwait with the time when our fathers went there, which was really opportunity. I mean, my father was a civil engineer, but when we went to Kuwait, there was a lack of technical skill set,
infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
There was nothing really.
Right.
So those talents, those skill sets were very needed. And if you were a business person or you were a skilled, highly technical person, you really had an opportunity to do that. Now, when it came time for us to graduate and go back, I, for example, got a message from my father that period in Kuwait was kind of over, and that if I was going to do something like that, it would have to maybe be Dubai. So our story, in a way, the reason why I'm kind of showing this is our story
Dubai is
as
the next
well,
Kuwait.
but
right.
our story as refugees, as people that are out of need or out of desire, basically displaced out of their country of origin to seek better life for them and their families, is a universal story. This is not limited to one.
Oh, sure.
One group.
It's the story of America.
It's
the story of America.
America was built this way.
My great grandfather was born in a boat, what they used to call coffin ships, in Ireland during the Great Potato Famine, where half the population was wiped out. I think it was roughly half the population.
Yep.
And the Irish in the 1840s. And so his parents had nothing. Everybody's starving. They got on a boat. They scraped together a few bucks and got on a boat. The boat was only supposed to hold 30, and they would pack 300-400 people in these boats. That's why they called them coffin ships.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't live.
Right.
And he was born on that boat, and one of the rare ones that lived. Most of the babies, if they were born, died in these boats. And so I'm told now, after we did a extensive family history, that there's a museum in Ireland, the Family Museum in Dublin, and there's a statue. They don't name him, but it's a statue of my grandfather, who became somewhat famous because he lived in these boats. So they were fleeing that, what they would say, the English oppression that didn't care for them and put them in the situation where one crop failed and they all died. And so they came fleeing here from that.
So the story that we're talking about here is, I know
it's the story of America.
It's really a universal story. It's the story of America. It's the story of refugees. It's where people are basically, just lower the volume, where people are basically looking for a better life out of necessity, out of crisis, out of whatever, and basically finding it. And in many cases, until recently, we seem to be here, at least, very, very supportive of that idea, and of people who want to better themselves and their life and bring that.
What does the Statue of Liberty say? Send us your huddled masses yearning to be free. It doesn't say send us the best and the brightest. It says send us the bottom of the barrel, the ones nobody else wants. The
your
poor,
huddled masses.
Yeah.
Huddled masses, yeah.
And give us, and we'll make a country out of these people.
So here's your dad in Kuwait, building a life. You know, the family is fortunate and is prospering. You're going to a private school, basically. Your family's, your siblings are going to private school. What happens after that? What happens after you graduate?
Most of us, as you know very well, Kuwait is not really our home. It's not our country.
And we couldn't really stay there unless we were working there and had a work visa.
Right. But it's never going to be your country.
Correct.
You're not going to be accepted as a citizen. You're always a second-class person there. It's not like the U.S. where you can eventually become a citizen.
Yeah, you can't own property.
Yeah.
You're not you don't have certain rights as a citizen, and you're never going to be unless very, very early on, the people that really went early on and they were able to get nationality or citizenship because they were really desperate for that skill set.
Can I ask you another difficult question? And tell me if I get too sensitive here. But again, I never forgot that classes I took in the 70s at the University of Michigan on what was then the Arab-Israeli conflict, and particularly this one professor who impacted me a great deal. And he said that of all the many things that has to finally be faced and dealt with, not just that when the Jewish state reassembled in the tribe and came back to Israel, that it wasn't empty land. There were people that living there that they pushed out or forced out or drove out. But that when the Palestinians look to all of their Arab neighbors, and from what I understand, Islam doesn't believe sort of in a nation, where everybody is one group of people, and when they called their fellow Arabs to support them, which they did, and sent forces in the several wars that were fought.
1967, yeah.
He said that the problem was that the Palestinians weren't a very popular group among the extensive Arab communities. It wasn't like the Palestinians were a loved group of people. They were kind of a poor group of people.
No, it's the exact opposite, actually.
Exact opposite.
No, it's the exact opposite. But you got to understand that there's a lot of wealth that was generated or discovered in those part of the countries.
But Palestine didn't have the oil.
No,
right.
No,
all the other.
No, but oil is not the only resource in that part of the world. I mean, you had agricultural wealth. You had. Well, you had. Well, no, there
in Iraq maybe.
Right, but I mean, so.
So I think his point was that you had all these oil-rich Arab nations.
His point is about Arab countries.
Right. Arab countries did. Yeah. And you're saying that you weren't accepted or would never be accepted. That seems surprising. We would all say, well, you're all Arabs. Can't you live anywhere? These were all artificially drawn territories anyway. They were tribes that had these areas.
See, the thing is that you have to understand there was a lot of wealth generated and was owned by select people that were native to that country.
Right.
And you can't just expect another million people to come and share that wealth. Why? We wouldn't do it. We're doing it right now. You understand that they have some natural wealth. They're not obligated to give it to someone else. We would do the same. And so I'm not saying that they were cruel or mean or whatever. They actually welcomed them. And a country like Jordan, Jordan gave them all the citizenships. And Iraq in particular, actually. Iraq welcomed them in open arms.
But Jordan did have, there was an uprising, and where it seemed like the Palestinians were going to try and take a bigger role or control, and the King Hussein suppressed the
but again, you're mixing all of this stuff together over a time frame of years. Okay, what gets missed out of that whole story is that in the case of refugees, okay, you have if there's no assimilation, there's true assimilation.
Right.
Okay, forget about the original crisis.
Right.
Okay, there are generation upon generation that are denied normalcy.
Right.
They're denied a potential for freedom, for potential for seeking life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Generation upon generation, because of lack of assimilation, because of lack of normalization of situations, are denied. And that's one after the other and after the other and after the other. And to expect that at some point that sort of unfairness, inequality, okay, lack of normalcy is not going to take a toll. It's not going to make people receptive to other alternative thoughts patterns. It's really unrealistic. I mean, who does that?
I don't deny. I guess what I'm trying to understand is these were, before there were nations there, these were just tribal areas, right? I mean, there isn't a nation of Kuwait.
That is true. There was no borders.
Yeah,
right. There was no borders.
And the Western powers, colonial, came in and divided them.
The reason why there are sharp turns and corners in the map of Kuwait, okay, in the middle of the desert, is because literally somebody ran a ruler and basically said, "Here's the border."
Right.
I mean,
so they created artificial
those are
borders.
colonial powers.
Right. So one could argue that there was I guess my question is, why couldn't the displaced Palestinians, I understand they didn't want to be displaced, they didn't want to leave, but those that after a generation or two said, I guess we're not going back, couldn't get, and to this day still aren't absorbed into the surrounding Arab countries. In Jordan, they've sort of been absorbed. In Palestine and Lebanon, they've sort of been absorbed.
No. In Lebanon,
they haven't.
Not Lebanon.
No.
Jordan was very, very nice at the very beginning, and a lot of them, including myself, our family, they gave citizenships.
Right.
Okay, Jordanian passports. Iraq was the same. A lot of people later on that left later were basically
Syria was similar.
Syria was similar. Were left to basically travel documents. They
live in refugee camps.
and living in refugee
Yes,
camps.
that's what I'm saying.
And
That, so
actually,
to this day, there's still...
that is very, very true.
Yeah.
There is very, very... there's
so
a lot
why
of-
didn't the Arab states absorb their fellow Arab nationality?
Do you want their reasoning or the real reason?
I want the real reason because
reason
because one of the things I understand that the Palestinians in this place, that's wrong, and I get it, and I understand a yearning to want to go back. For example, I'll just give you another historical.
You mean like how we don't want to absorb refugees in this country?
Well, sure, yeah.
Well,
exactly.
I mean, let's get to that topic.
Or in Europe.
Because in there's a misnomer here that there's a big racism movement in America right now, and there's the Trump movement.
Sure.
And we're becoming more and more of a racist country. But in
Right.
reality, the West is the least racist place in the world.
Sure.
I mean, we have a black president. We had a black president.
Yeah. Where else?
And the number one, I just read the statistic, the number one racist country in the world, do you know what it is? Number one in the world is Lebanon.
Lebanon?
Yes. I mean, seriously, you are not sometimes welcome into a pub or a bar or a restaurant just because you're black.
Really?
Yes.
In Lebanon?
In
Do they even have black people
Well,
in Lebanon?
I
That
mean-
can't be
But again,
And-
I just want to say this. Okay, we talk about this stuff like it's this oddity that's limited to somewhere, right? In Ireland, you have factions. In Ireland, the people
can
from
tell
the
the
county of
difference there.
Cork and there's a certain element of discrimination.
Tribalism, yeah.
That's tribalism. Where it's like saying, well, why did people get absorbed? Okay, why did in the United States they put Native Americans on reservations, forever and ever and ever, right? There is a inherent thing
but
about protecting what the wealth that I have,
Right.
and not necessarily diluting it by allowing other people to have equal
Yeah,
the same access.
but to his point, I mean, seriously.
So Palestinians fled. Why were they still kept to this day in refugee camps
till
or
this
not
day.
welcome?
And they're not even allowed to work.
Yeah.
And they're not even allowed to.
I think that's
some
part of the untold
education.
story.
So here's
But that's
the
not
real
everywhere.
reason. Okay,
Right.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, in Lebanon, every country, by the way, you cannot stereotype the whole thing.
Right.
Every
Okay.
country has its own predicaments and situations.
Dynamics, yeah.
Yeah, dynamics. In Lebanon, for example, it's the demographics of the country. There is an existing base of sects and religions, and when you absorb, like Sunnis, you upset the Shiites, and you
Right.
upset
And
the
there's a lot of
Christians,
religious
and-
basis
yeah,
to that secting,
Yeah.
like president and the
Yeah.
parliament and the head of
So-
parliament.
they don't
in
wanna-
Lebanon, they actually had to pick for a while a Christian or whatever it was,
Oh, yeah,
Maronite.
you have to
and-
be a Christian to be a president.
Is
You
it
have to be.
Maronites? Is that who they are?
Yeah.
Maronite Christians and
Right. Right. So anyway, it affects the status quo of the country in Lebanon, for example. So to your point, yes, there's a lot of discrimination against Palestinians in some countries.
Right.
In some countries, again, they were welcomed and they flourished and they
Yep.
did very well.
Right.
But the point I think that we started talking about, which is the history of, and if you wanted to get into
Yeah.
the screenplay that
Yes, please.
that I'm talking
Please,
about.
because and let me just set the stage this way. These are things that are, to us, not necessarily first place experiences, because we were not the ones that
Exactly.
experienced that, but it's very much part of our family storytelling.
Yes, right.
It's very much part of our reality and awareness, right?
Right.
And so you grow up with that. You grow up with that as a non-citizen. And I'm not meaning it in a discriminatory, derogatory manner, but a non-citizen in Kuwait, for example. It could have been any other country, right? Traveling somewhere else to get your education, then basically trying to find your way.
Trying to fit in.
Trying to
somewhere
fit
where you
in
can
somewhere.
be a citizen.
Right.
Right.
And that
Would you ever consider going back to if the two-state solution is ever really figured out and becomes more than just sort of a paper solution, a real solution? Would you go back and to the if there's a Palestinian homeland somewhere?
I'll let Tarek answer.
Well, there is none, and there is no two-state solution. If we're going to get into that,
yeah,
I mean,
no,
the situation in
that's the track they've been trying to push for a number of years.
Yeah, in theory, but not in reality.
Right.
The situation there is so dire right now, and the discrimination is rampant, and it's well known.
So if the Palestinians were able to form a state somewhere, as the Kurds have tried to do, as others have tried to do, who were cut out of this when the colonial powers divvied the whole thing up here, would you go back to a Palestinian? Would you feel the strong pull, like Jews did after 2,000 years? Suddenly they all wanted to come back to a Jewish state. They didn't want to for 2,000 years.
It's not the same thing. For one thing, we didn't grow up in Palestine. We did not. We grew up in Kuwait. Number one. Number two, Palestine, as our parents knew it, is not the Palestine today, where it's a ghetto and surrounded by walls, and there's gates for those walls, and discrimination everywhere.
Right.
Even if it becomes a state, It's really
It's
not.
still it's still isolated.
It's village after village. You have to go through gates to go from one village to the next.
Wow.
So that's even if that is going to happen, which I highly doubt. The situation in Israel, Palestine. I mean, eventually, whether they like it or not, it's going to be one state.
Yeah, there's there.
I mean, you can't.
The irony of what we're talking about here, Paul, is 1 minute ago you asked me about how come these Arab states did not absorb the Palestinians.
Right.
Right. And then in the second breath, we're talking about the reality and being okay with it of a two-state situation. And yet, exactly the premise of what you said.
But
first,
there's a reason for that, and the reason is I've seen many things where they've talked about this Arab-Israeli this never-ending battle here, is that the difference is that Israel was created as a Jewish state, and if they don't create a separate state, they will be a minority in their own state.
You mean like Northern Ireland?
No, it's even worse because...
No, but wasn't that based on religion too?
Yes, exactly. And that's why Northern Ireland can never get absorbed into the Southern Ireland, because they would lose all control over that. They would be a Protestant group of Englishmen in a Irish Catholic state.
And what's the current condition?
But let me tell you about
the current condition. It's a separate state.
But let me tell you about the Jewish state.
Right.
You really that is probably one of the most racist statement you can ever say. Because you're saying, like, okay, this is a Jewish state, and if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist, screw you.
This isn't for you.
Okay,
right.
So that's, I mean, and then I hear the word of it's a democracy in it's only philosophy. How could it be a democracy and give only Jews a right to vote?
But it's,
now remember, in Israel, in today's Israel, there's over 1 million Palestinians that are Arabs. You know, so what about them?
Faster growing population,
exactly.
and so if you set out to create a state that is just one religion,
yeah,
right,
it's an oxymoron.
Look,
it's just saying like a Jewish
the current
democracy. What about the rest of the people? You know, you can't. It's not. It doesn't make sense.
The current state of condition in that part of the world is not sustainable.
Absolutely.
The only way it is going to be sustained is with increased discrimination, with increased cracking down, and ironically, all the things that were subject and victimizations of Jews, and basically we all feel sympathy about during World War II and previously, will then become more and more enacted in that part of the world. The irony there is amazingly sad. Okay, the two-state solution is never. It looked good on paper, but it was never reality-based.
Well, Rod, it's simple. It's very, very simple. Equality for all, it says.
Exactly.
Why is that hard to understand?
Right.
Why does one religion or one sect be superior to another?
You can't have what's set out to be a religious state. It's like Iran. If you set out to create a religious Shia state and it suddenly became majority Christian.
And how do we feel about Iran?
But Iran, that's number one. Number two, that's 99% of the population.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, it's not the same when you talk about Israel.
No, exactly.
There's only one solution.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but that's the problem, is that you've got a group of people that came back to create a singularly religious state, and they're going to be, if they can't figure out how to incorporate these other people, are going to be a minority in their own state.
Like South Africa.
Exactly.
It has a lot of power.
Jimmy Carter compared it to apartheid.
It is a lot of parallels with apartheid. 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you got streets in Israel that only Jews can drive on.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Different color license plates.
The Palestinians have their own.
They have different color license plates?
Yes. Talk about apartheid.
See, I did not. I don't know this. That's why I'm asking.
How is that for irony about labeling people with different visual imagery to identify them?
Palestinians have to have so it is like the South Africans tried to say the South Africans were a minority white population in an overwhelmingly black country, and they tried to say, well, let's make the black citizens of other little entities here.
All I'm saying is we can bury our head in the sand for another 50, 60 years. The end of the day,
inevitable.
It
has to be equality for all.
There's no other solution to that situation.
Then it can't be a Jewish state then.
Exactly. I mean, can you have a Catholic state? The United States call it a Catholic state.
Right.
You can't. What about the rest of us?
Right.
You know, you cannot do that. It doesn't make sense. But
I am Catholic, so I'll go with the Catholic state.
But you know where it stems from? It stems from insecurity.
Yeah.
It stems from fear. It stems from like old collective pain.
Human conditions.
Yes,
human
that
traits.
they've had to adhere for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so now they're doing that to the people, the victims of that.
I'm going to say another incendiary thing. I hope this doesn't blow up there.
No one's listening.
No. I
think people are listening.
I'm a quarter Polish. All right, so my dad was half Polish.
That explains it.
That's it. That's the whole thing. Now you got it. Now, Poland, when I went back and researched it, was wiped out for 400 years off the maps of Europe.
Yep.
And it wasn't until the Polish Empire at one time was pretty strong, and then they got absorbed by the Habsburgs and the Germans and everybody else and the Russians and everything else. And this country ceased to exist for 400 years. And yet, people refused to get absorbed into Russia, Germany, Austria, whatever. They still said, we're Polish. They still spoke a language called Polish. And 400 years later, they were rewarded, and Poland, after World War I, was recreated.
Sure. So did Armenia, so did...
Armenia, yeah, the Kurds and all these other places and stuff.
That's all true.
And what's shocking to many of us is that sustainability of an idea that we are a group of people who have long since lost their homeland, don't just get absorbed in and forget about it. The French in Quebec, who still are surrounded by an English country, who will never give up their French identity.
So the only conciliation is, as Tarek was saying, equality for all.
It's simple as that.
But then it won't be true. The nature of the state would have to change.
Well, we already agreed on that.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Well, but hold on a second. There's a difference between the nature of everything in the state or the official religion of the state, because we grew up in a country which is basically Muslim.
They're racist. I mean, the whole Arab world is racist. There's no doubt about it. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, you're not allowed to have a church. You know?
Really?
But it's accepted.
That's
it's
true.
known. It's not a secret.
Yeah,
it's
right.
agreed on. You know. So they are. I mean, but you cannot force that when half the population or more than half is from another religion.
Now,
if you're all Muslim, fine. If you're all Christian,
exactly.
fine.
And by the way, none of those countries claim to be democracies.
No. And
so
thank God they're not. Look
the
what
irony,
happened in
right?
Egypt.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if it's good that they're not democracies. We tried that with the Arabic Spring, and look what a disaster that was.
So, yet, when you look at the history of that region, first under, way back when, the Persians, and then the Ottomans came and ruled it for whatever, how many hundreds or 1,000 years or something here?
600.
600. They found a way for this incredibly diverse ethnic mix, religious mix, tribal mix, ethnic mix. People think of it as just an Arab world.
Okay,
it's
so
not.
let me,
how did all that coexist for 1,000 years?
I want to get away from all that, because what's happening...
I'm fascinated.
But what's happening here is the conversation is going into what usually happens, which is, let's just universalize this conversation versus talk about the actual particulars of this exact experience.
You're right.
Okay? This is not trying to, how do we make it equal to something else? This is a situation that took place. It had an impact on people. People found themselves in refugee situation for a lifetime. How old are you?
53. Thanks for...
Thanks for bringing that up.
It's all right. I'm like right there with him, right? So we are very much of the same generation, okay? So for 50 plus years, we have lived with this reality. It hasn't stopped us from seeking stuff.
It's not like we were victims.
No.
We grew up very, very luxurious.
Right. But what I'm saying is, there is a story here to be told, and there is a solution to be had. Whether it's an appealing solution for people to hear, they're ready to hear it or not. At the end of the day, and I agree with Tarek completely. Right, we're different religions. The solution here is equality for all in that situation. Anything short of that is never going to work.
Well, this is a good segue into the screenplay.
So the screenplay that you wrote.
Right.
Well, this is
about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah. It's been dormant for a while, but I have more time right now, so I've been spending more time in it and on it. And basically, it's the same what we were talking about earlier. I went to Israel in '94 after the peace between Jordan and Israel, and it was more kosher to go. So I went there, and I was doing business with them, actually. And I met a gentleman by the name of Israel. His name was Israel.
His name was Israel.
And he's a former general.
Okay.
And I was like spending time with him and listening to his story. And then I went back to Jordan. My dad was in Jordan at that time, and we talked about it. And I was listening to my dad's story more and more, and I saw so many parallels as an outsider. Now we are, whether we like it or not, we
observers,
are outsiders,
right.
and we're outsiders. Really, we never suffered a day in our lives, except for business reasons.
Right.
But in terms of like belonging or fitting in, it was never really that hard.
Right.
But listening to them both, and then finally, actually, I arranged a meeting between them, between Israel Gal, his name is, and my dad, one day, and just got me going and stood up the whole idea of look at those two. I was sitting just watching them. They're both victims.
And the parallels.
Yeah. And I wrote a screenplay based on their lives, which is based on a true story about how. And then, of course, there has to be a Hollywood
Embellished.
Some drama,
Hollywood,
right? Conflict drama,
But Israel Gal, I mean, the story goes like when he saw his own dad being killed in the Holocaust, and then his mom coming to him and telling him never again be a victim.
Right.
And same thing with my dad when he saw his dad die, and his mother coming to him and telling him go make a man of yourself, never again be a victim.
Right.
And then they grew up in Jerusalem, those two kids, and they were playing soccer together and just like having a normal childhood until the war of 48 and then 67, and then it goes into the Oslo Peace Accords and at that time, like 50 years later, 40 years later, one is a general in the Israeli army, and my father is a successful businessman, and they get together and they like remember their childhoods, and they have to go through the process of getting peace somehow. And the story goes and the story goes into more drama. Of course, there's a lot of elements of drama in it.
So,
But
is there hope for peace somehow?
Well, Netanyahu himself. We're talking about the collective pain. He saw his own brother being killed in Africa. What's that?
Uganda.
Yeah.
In the raid against Idi Amin.
Yeah, exactly. No,
in Entebbe?
No. Entebbe.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the raid on Entebbe.
So his own brother, I mean, he has so much pain and so much anger, and he never wants to be a victim again. You know?
Right.
So there's so much fear from the other side. Similarly, now on the Palestinian side, there's so much distrust because how they've been treated. So the only way is enlightenment. I mean, they have to really understand that there is no superior human over another human being. We're all equals. And that goes to the other story that I wrote.
What helped in
about
Ireland,
spirituality.
apparently, was that the women finally rose up and said, enough of this. I know your father got slaughtered, my father got slaughtered, and your uncle got killed, my uncle got killed. Enough. I'm not going to count the bodies anymore. We're moving forward. Everybody got killed. Everybody bad things happened. We're going to quit arguing about it. We're going to quit fighting about it. We don't want to see more die.
Well, we talked about it before that, everything, anger only produces more anger, and killing produces more killing. And on the Palestinian side, obviously, there was a lot of collective slaughters for some of their cities, and that's where they fled. They were out of fear. And they retaliated with violence.
Right.
And obviously, that got them more and more pain. So violence only breeds violence. So the only way to do it is to get another Martin Luther King or Gandhi or some Palestinian to stand up and say enough of all this bullshit, civil disobedience, no violence whatsoever. Unfortunately, there hasn't been violence on the Palestinian sides for like how many years? 5 years now, 6 years? None. But there's been no progress. So that, and eventually they're going to boil, and it's going to be another.
And it's going to come up to another boiling point.
Unless the other side realizes that these are human beings just like we are, and we have to treat them as equals. Otherwise, this thing is going to explode again.
Well, like I said, it's not a sustainable position. It could be 100 years, but it's not a sustainable
Jimmy
situation.
Carter, an evangelical Christian, called it apartheid and was bashed by everybody that in this country here. And he said it's no different than what South Africans tried to do to the African, native African population.
The minute
there.
you open your mouth, they silence you and they call you anti-Semitic and whatever. And the truth is that all they're looking for is equality.
Well, you can't be an anti-Semite if you're a Semite.
Yeah.
We're Semites.
Yeah.
How true! Wow, yeah.
See,
Semitic people.
You can't. Semitic people cannot be anti-Semitic. What are you anti yourself?
Right.
So, but I
so this experience of being a refugee is fascinating because I can't imagine being a refugee.
Well, and we said we were going to talk about it.
Us being refugees?
You what?
No, our parents were refugees. Trust me, we grew up.
No,
you didn't grow up in camps or whatever.
I would never say that we have even the inkling of what people that live in refugee camps, that are Palestinian or otherwise, have any experience with. We don't. We were very spoiled, very lucky. We lived a good life.
Do you think you were spoiled
because of the drive of our parents as refugees? Yeah, I think so. And
our
I think
parents were.
Yeah.
But
my dad was very poor. And it was an orphan and grew up in the Depression, horrible times. Not comparing it to being a refugee, that's even worse, it sounds like. But he spoiled me, kept me from doing things that he just never.
All lucky. We're all very lucky.
I'm never going to have my children do what I had to do.
More recently, you experienced with the Vietnamese, with the Cambodians, with the Koreans. Where the first generation comes in, and they're hardworking. Industrious, entrepreneurial, and then the second generation is highly educated, and you provide opportunities for your kids.
That's exactly
so they can
right.
take it to the next level and so forth.
And the third generation becomes very. I've seen a lot of Vietnamese third generation kids, and their parents are now successful, wealthy business people, and they're Not at all. Because they didn't.
No drive.
Vietnam to them is. I didn't go through any of that pain and suffering here. What's that?
Well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And those, and when you're a refugee, you work much harder than everyone else.
So here's interesting. I want to ask you, right?
Sure.
You've done this. You've been your own businessman. You've been successful. You're serial entrepreneur, and you now have time and you're doing script writing. What is it that's driving you to express yourself in that format?
To tell the story.
Well,
is it just where you're at in your life is sort of the next chapter?
Well, it's part of contributing somehow.
To share,
by as we said earlier, violence is not going to get you anywhere. Political office is not going to get you anywhere in that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to spread the word is spread enlightenment and to show both sides that they're both victims, and to show that violence doesn't get them anywhere. And with this story, hopefully people would read it and understand.
And you did another screen.
Yes, the second
play, right?
one. The second one is more about enlightenment, and it's based on teachings of Eckhart Tolle.
Uh-huh.
And actually, the name of the screenplay is Hole in the Flute. And I don't know if you
Hole in the Flute.
Hole in the Flute.
Oh, Hole in the Flute. Okay.
Yeah, and that's basically by a Sufi teacher, Hafiz. And basically it means like, I am a hole in the flute, and let the breath of Jesus go through the flute and make beautiful music.
And the Sufis tend to be the more mystic elements of Islam.
They're
right.
the original, actually, before politics got involved.
Right.
But regardless, so this story is about how, if we, basically, I'm not sure if you know who Eckhart Tolle is, but basically his premise is that we're all energy, and everything else is ego and fear of the past and the future. And if we just connect in the same frequency, we can relate to each other as human beings, not only human beings, but even with animals and with nature itself. And
Dr. Doolittle, we can talk to the animals.
Yes, there's a lot of truth to that. And so based on that, I wrote a screenplay called Hole in the Flute. And
Hole in the Flute, what a fascinating
See, but
idea.
I see the two of them actually are parallels.
Very related.
Very related.
Because if the other side or both sides notice that they're connected as human beings, they'll stop this madness.
Right.
And they'll stop discriminating against each other and connect to each other.
Right. All that noise falls away.
And that leads
and
to a quick discussion of where we're at today in this country, because we're forgetting the other side as human beings. We're not looking at the dreamers as human beings. We're just looking at them as those people who came in and came here illegally and somehow took something or threatened to take something away from us, and we need to kick those others out.
Well, if we're going to talk about Trump, of course, there's a lot of craziness going on. But in reality,
but it's the same craziness you're talking about here. It's the fear of others.
Exactly.
Well, it's all this time. That driving inherent, fear. That's all this time.
Yeah, but what got Trump to where he is a couple of very valid points. I mean, there's a lot of things that Trump came up starting with economically that we're really being stupid about. And there's a lot of even like the right to citizenship just because you're born here. That's stupid. I mean, you have somebody from Cambodia come here on a vacation, have a baby, and leave back to Cambodia, has no assimilation in the country, no contribution, and he's a U.S. citizen. And we have to defend him wherever he is. And by the way, giving birth to him was on our dime. So there's a lot of points.
But that goes back to the revolutionary ideals of our forefathers, that they felt that anybody who could make it here was an American.
Yeah, but it used to take 3 months to get here on a ship.
Sure, they didn't understand
so it's a transit stop.
And you didn't leave,
and
you didn't leave 48 hours after you gave birth.
Exactly.
I mean, there is.
And you didn't come here and take advantage.
And it was a way for them all who had not been, none of them had been born in the country, to say, you don't have to be born in the country here. You're.
Yeah, but my point is not only that. There's a lot of things economically that a lot of countries take advantage of us, and so Trump started off and then draining the swamp. All the lobbyists and all the way our organization.
All he did is restock it, though. He didn't drain it.
Right. So the the promises were one thing.
Yeah.
But with that, even though there's solid reason to reevaluate based on what, like, for example, Tarek was just sharing with being born here and sort of a reform. Immigration reform, if you will. Okay,
right.
There's grounds for that.
Yes.
But to then take a approach of almost like a blunt machete,
right,
and basically put 800,000 people at the mercy of being deported, okay, within a 6-month period,
who've done nothing wrong except
and why? Why?
Why?
Why?
Well, I'll
what
tell you,
economic benefit?
I think there's
just to be an asshole.
Right. No. Well, there's a component I think that, if it's true, is very, very unfortunate and sad, is that if you're holding these 800,000 people hostage to getting a full immigration reform plan, including potential funding for the wall, if you're holding this as an emotional hostage that basically only will be freed if you get immigration reform that has a ban of certain people and a wall and whatever, that is more tragic than actually even putting it.
No, I'm going to give you more tragic because you continue to underestimate my friends in the Midwest where I grew up. The same people who voted for Trump, who regularly communicate, my high school friends.
Where did you grow up?
In Detroit.
Okay.
Who regularly respond to me and think that I'm the outlier and I'm the insane person.
What is it?
And that is, we don't want all of you that don't look like us here.
Yeah.
We don't want a group of Muslims. We don't want a group of Mexicans. We don't want them all here.
But that's
I know.
too late.
It is too late. It's way too late.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say that. I'm embarrassed that my friends and family feel that way. But at the root of it, they're not holding those dreamers hostage. They want them out, and their parents, and everybody that looks like them.
Yeah, but that's too late. But
That's
regarding
the truth.
But regarding Trump, the reason he's doing. By the way, what's going on right now with this million, kids here that came here?
Yeah,
right.
It's none of their fault.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
the dreamers.
It's not going to happen. So why does Trump do it? He does it for his base.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the only reason he does it. It's
Because
not
his
going to go
base
anywhere.
wants them all
not gonna go
gone.
anywhere.
Well, he also switched it over and kind of basically passed the hot potato to Congress.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the chicken.
Yeah.
Here you go. Now it's yours.
So
chicken
that's the
approach.
reason he's doing it, is what I'm saying.
So we got 1 minute to wrap up. We have another show waiting out there. I'm fascinated. I'd love to have you come back and talk more about this journey.
But I think the interesting thing about what you just said and what we were talking about before is even in this situation, the only solution is that you accept
Equality.
that everybody has
Exactly.
equality.
And America,
Which is the basic tenet of the country.
and here's my response to my friends. America was not founded on racial or religious reasons. America was the only country I know of in the history of the world that says if you believe in three things, you're part of the club: equality, liberty, and opportunity. If you can accept those three things, I don't care what you look like, I don't care who you pray to, I don't care what the color of your skin is, come on in, you're part of the club.
Perfect way to end it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Tarek, thank you for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, and come back again.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us on the Raad Life. If you have any questions for Tarek, how do they get hold of you?
Email, I guess.
Yeah.
TRISHEQ@gmail.com.
And you can reach me at Raad, R-A-A-D, Gantos, G-H-A-N-T-O-U-S, @gmail.com. You can also send me a message on the Raad Life, R-A-A-D-L-I-F-E, on Facebook. And you can always call me, 949-212-8299. If it's a hate call, don't call me.
Yeah, please, no.
Okay, and I hope to have you guys join us next week, Wednesday, 12 o'clock, on the Raad Life for some more exciting stuff. Tarek asked me if this was going to be controversial. I said, no, it's not gonna It wasn't controversial. The more we
It was enlightening.
The more we talk, we say this on the show all the time, the more we talk about these things that are difficult, be they about aging, be they about abuse, be they about political,
journeys.
unfairness, the more we talk about this, the more likely we are to come to the table and figure out a way to coexist and have equality for all.
Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Raad Life Radio Show with your host and age explorer, Raad Gantos, brought to you on the one and only OCTalkRadio.net. Join us again next week as we continue our journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older.